So chapter 7 on analyzing data picks up kind of three major pieces that I want to talk a little bit about and get you doing a little bit of reading and thinking here in a second. The first area, the first section of it is on validity, reliability, and triangulation, and it goes into this idea of how do you know that the data you're collecting is accurate and credible, and then what about the analysis? Sort of what do you do when you analyze your data? So the first section here should have been pretty familiar because you've studied validity and reliability. You're probably doing that right now in your assessment class if you haven't talked about it before in Ed Psych and so forth. How would you characterize, what's the difference between validity and reliability in study? What's that mean?
Validity is are your results accurate? Is your experiment accurate or research accurate? Some of the results end up accurate. Reliability is your process able to be repeated again?
Okay, good, good. So can I trust the results that I got, and can I repeat them again and get something somewhat similar next time? Okay. Validity is something, particularly if you're going to give any kind of a, like a survey or an achievement test, you know, to see if your students actually know their stuff they're supposed to learn or whatever, you want to make sure that that test is really measuring the construct that you're trying to measure. You know, and how well does what I'm trying to measure actually get measured? Whether it's a survey or a test or an interview or whatever, I want to make sure that it's valid, that it's actually getting the results that I want. We'll get into that more in a little bit more in a second. The reliability is the repeatability thing. So when you do a study, you want to detail it out enough and then know exactly what you're doing so that you could replicate. You could do that exact same study again if you wanted to. Or if you passed off your paper to somebody else, next year's group could take your study and replicate the exact same study and see if they got the same results. And in some cases, that's what you're doing. When you read a literature review and somebody says, hey, here's what I did in a school, you might read that and go, you know what, I could try something like that similar in my school too. So if you know what those steps are, can I repeat it and basically get the same results or similar results the next time around? So what is triangulation? What's that refer to? Right?
Looking at something from multiple perspectives.
Okay, can you give me an example?
So if you're looking at a test, you would be looking at it as like the teacher, but you'd also want to look at it from like a student's perspective and maybe even like an outside teacher's perspective.
Okay, so looking at maybe that test from various angles. Okay, what else?
Could it be also looking at your quantitative and qualitative data?
Right, and
like using both?
And put them together. That's right, using both. So I might do something like this. Maybe I'm going to do a survey about, we heard some things about like technology use, for example. So maybe I'm going to do a survey with my students about technology use and how it impacts them in my class. And I'm going to tabulate that survey, the survey results, but then I'm going to take a sampling of my students and sit down and interview them one-on-one and talk to them. And the qualitative data that we get from the interviews can be coupled with the quantitative data that I might have gotten from them filling out bubbles on a survey, and I talk about the two of them together, right? Or maybe I'm going to observe my students doing something, and then I'm going to give them some kind of a written test. And I can talk about how they did on the test, and how that compares with how I saw them actually performing in the classroom. So whenever you can take multiple looks at something in some way, you are triangulating the data. You're making it a lot more credible that way, because the person reading it realizes that you're not just using this one thing to measure your construct. I guess if you think about it, it makes sense, because how many of you have been in a class at one time or another that was primarily your grade was determined by a test, but you felt like you learned a lot more than the test actually showed? You ever been in that boat? Okay, and that's exactly, yeah, so that's what it is, right? You're kind of looking at it saying, why didn't that instructor measure me in some way other than just a test? Why didn't he or she also take into consideration homework assignments or attendance or participation or all those other pieces, maybe a project or whatever, that give me different looks at you than just giving you a written test? Because a test can only tell me so much. So if I gather data from different kinds of sources like that, and I determine your grade not only based on tests, but maybe homework and quizzes and projects and presentations and journal writing and so forth, and I put all that together, the composite you might be a lot more accurate for who you actually are and what you've learned than I could learn from a test. Okay? So really, as teachers, we should be in the triangulating business all the time. You know? So if you've taken a class, raise your hand if you've taken a class where you had a midterm and a final and your entire grade was based on those two things. Okay, several of us must have been there, right? Does that tell the whole story of what you learned in the class? unfortunately not. It's a terrible way to determine. It's one way, it's just a piece of it, but gosh, we ought to be looking at stuff other than that. Because those two pieces alone are not going to define who we are. And so our students are going to be in the same boat. You're teaching somebody in a 7th grade science class, if all you're doing is giving them a test once every 2 weeks, and your entire grade is based on those tests, you're missing the boat, right? So we don't want to miss the boat when we're doing the research either, make sure it's coming from different angles. So in chapter 7, they talk about a number of different things that we do when we collect and analyze data to make sure that we're accurate, okay, that we're really saying the right kind of things about our population that we're studying, and that we are credible. You know, that somebody reading it is going to say, yeah, I mean, the results there seem to make sense, it's credible. So the first advice they give is to make sure that observations are recorded carefully and precisely. Anytime that you're doing any kind of an observation, whether you're in a classroom, making notes about what students are doing, or you're interviewing somebody, writing down notes, or whatever it happens to be, that all of the information that you're writing down is put down carefully and precisely. And right along with that is, what are all those phases of the data collection? We were talking about a couple minutes ago, this idea of being able to duplicate or replicate your steps. So in your paper, or before you actually do your paper, in your preparation of kind of what your research is going to be, how you're going to collect your data, you want to make sure very carefully defined. I'm going to collect data by doing this, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to get a survey, here's a copy of the survey, I'm going to interview 10 students, and here's the questions I'm going to ask them. Everything is really well spelled out, so that you're making it clear to the reader, this is exactly what I did. And I ought to be able to take your research paper, walk into my own classroom, and do exactly the same thing, because you told me exactly what you were going to do. Don't just tell me that you did a survey with them, tell me what you asked them in the survey, and why you asked those questions, and so forth, so that it can be replicated by somebody else. Thirdly, report everything of importance as you go along, making sure that you're not leaving out details. Be as objective as possible. There's an important one. If you remember last year I talked to you about this whole idea that your study doesn't have to support your hypothesis, right? I've had people get to the end of a project like this, and I know I mentioned this a year ago to you, so I want to refresh our memory on this, that I've had people get to the end of a project or where they've collected the data, and the data doesn't really support what they thought was going to happen. And they think they kind of messed up the project. And it's sort of like, well, I hate to, I'm embarrassed to say, my hypothesis was the kids would love this, and they actually hated it. Now what do I do? Well, that's okay. That's exactly what you're going to write about in your paper. I thought they'd love it, and they didn't, and here's what happened. You know, so it's okay if your hypothesis is not supported. The main thing is you've got to be objective about it. Don't try to bend things in your direction, and certainly don't lie about the data that you got. This is the data I got. Here's what I thought was going to happen. Here's what the data suggests. By golly, I was wrong. You know, or I changed my thinking because of this, and here's what's going on. But we want to make sure that we're honest and objective in our reporting. And sometimes it's interesting to read a research study where the person's hypothesis just wasn't supported. And that's publishable, by the way. I mean, you can publish that in a journal and say, this is what I thought was going to happen, but in reality, here's what really did happen. And it's not the same thing, and that's okay. A lot better than trying to bend the data in your direction to make it sound like something happened that didn't. We talked about the multiple sources, the right kinds of data sources. This is really important too. Think about this when you're designing your final study of how you're going to collect data. Make sure that you're getting the right kind of data. So here's an example. Suppose that I was interested in you as a teacher. And so I'm looking at, I'm saying, how effectively is Zoe teaching her science class? Okay? So one way that I could do that is I could give a survey to all of Zoe's students and ask them to write about how well Zoe teaches science. Would that be helpful? Would that tell the whole story? No. How could I tell the story better? Real simple. What's the easiest way to get that information? What's that?
Observer.
Observer. Watch her teach, right? Why am I asking her students how good of a teacher she is? Why don't I just walk in the room and watch her teach? Right? Doesn't that tell you more? So, even true for faculty on this campus, right? You fill out a course evaluation, and you as a student are reporting, this is what I saw, or this is what I thought about this instructor in my class, and that's well and good. But did somebody else come out, actually walk in the room and watch that person teach? Because that's going to be useful also. Somebody's got to observe them. So I would say the primary source of data would be me actually watching Zoe teach and giving her feedback, rather than just asking the students. Which doesn't mean that the students' input is not useful. It is. But here we go with triangulating again, right? If the only thing I get is their image, and I didn't actually see her teach, That's not very useful. You know, I've got to be able to put those pieces together. So think about the kind of data. I heard some of you, when you're going around the circle here, talk about asking students how they felt about or what they thought about something. That's okay. But let's suppose, for example, that I wanted to know, I used this method of teaching where I used cooperative learning, and I want to know if it really impacted the learning of my students. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to my students and ask them if it impacted their learning. Well, that's okay, but I probably ought to measure the learning. You know, maybe giving them a test that tests them on some type of a kind of a hard assessment like that tests on them what they were supposed to learn will tell me more about what they learned than asking the student, did you learn a lot, right? I mean, how do I know? So I do this unit on, you know, choose your topic, and I finish the end of the unit, and I want to know, did Christy actually learn something from that unit? If I just ask Christy, did you learn a lot from the unit? She says, yes, I did. I could just say, okay, great, she learned a lot, she gets an A. Well, maybe I ought to actually give her a test and see if she learned it. You know, what was the content? Did she actually learn it? So the kind of data that I'm collecting is going to add to my credibility. Think about, are you measuring that construct, that thing that you're trying to measure, in the best possible way that you can? If you want to know what the students are thinking, you got to ask them, okay? And so you're going to have to survey them, interview them, or better still, both, and then triangulate the data and see what the students are saying. And then lastly, and this is one that's, I think this is really important, take a long look at the data. What you don't want to do is just gather a bunch of data together and sort of throw something together as a final result. We really want to take time to think about the data that's out there, what it means, what its implications are. And that brings me to a study that I would like for you to read a short piece of here right now. This is actually a study on texting, and it was published in the Psych Central journal, kind of an online publication. And I want you to read it and then talk a little bit about the study and its conclusions. So, if you go back into Canvas, if you click under the button for modules, and you're seeing things here that I'm showing things here that you can't see yet because I got something shut off. But under that, for class session 1, there's a copy of the PowerPoint we're using right now, and then there's another link down here that's called Texting Study. And if you click there, there is another link that says to open it in a new window. And I'm going to click there, and it should open.
I don't think we have class session one.
You can't access it? Okay, thank you. Oh, I see. I didn't turn this on. I'm sorry. Let me try that. Can you try it again? Is that working now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. I turned these little clouds on over here, but I forgot to turn on the entire module. So now you should be able to click on that, and you get to this study. It's called Hypertexting is Associated with Health Risks for Teens. This is a study that was published at Psych Central, and this is not the study itself, but what it is kind of a summary of the study and its results. So what I want you to do right now is just take a couple minutes to read through that short article. And look at it as though through the lens of a researcher.